All right, very good. Well, good evening, everybody. It's good to have you out on a Wednesday night. Hope you're doing well, and looking forward to spending a little bit of time with you, talking about I think a very important topic, something that I get asked a lot. Before we dive into that, I just want to introduce myself as Dr. Marty Mrazek. You can see the rest of the Elite Athlete Sports and Elite Athlete Services team, Cody and Jason and Doc Naidu. We're really excited to have come together as an organization to do some things that we think are really important. I just have to give a few disclosures in terms of what I do. Besides my work with Elite Athlete Services, I am a professor at the University of Alberta. I've been a professor for about 18 years, and I've had the real privilege to work with a lot of athletes at all levels of sport. And so I've been a consultant in the Canadian Football League for about 15 years, a consultant with the NHL for the last over 20 years, consulted with the U of A with their athletes, and worked with athletes through the Glen Sather Clinic. So again, what our mission is and why are we doing this is because we really are excited about helping athletes reach their potential. And there's been a lot of talk and a lot of focus on mental health and mental performance, and that's what we're going to be going through tonight. Athletes want to have an edge. They want to make it to the next level. And there's obviously a lot of ways to get there. And so Elite Athlete Services, we put together the best team that we can in order to do that for you. So with that in mind, my question for you is tonight is, what is a championship mindset? What does it take to win? What does it take for you to get to the next level? And I get asked the question a lot of what do I have to do in the world of mental fitness, in the world of mental performance? Of course, most of you, I'm sure, are putting in an awful lot of time on a daily and weekly basis into hockey. And, you're doing training not only in the preseason, but in the regular season. I'm sure you have dry land training. And then spring, you maybe get a week off, and then you're back at it. And then you have summer and power skating and all these things. So you're putting in an awful lot of time, which is great. The other side of it is the mental side of things. And especially as you get to the higher levels of sports, the mental game becomes more and more important because the skill level will even out. And some of you have probably worked and played with other players that are really talented, that are really skilled, and yet they may be struggling in this specific area. And all athletes tend to struggle at some point in their career. They go into a slump. They're just not scoring like they normally do. All those things that can really weigh on an athlete. And so we're here to talk about that and talk about the mental side of things, because that side of things, I think, is a little tougher to understand, but it's also something that we're seeing a lot of traction. A lot of players are now looking to the mental side of things to get that edge, to improve their performance. And that's why we're really glad to be working with the JPHL and the HSL in order to provide you this information. Okay, so let's begin with just an overview of mental health. You've probably seen, and there's been a lot of discussion about athlete mental health, especially since COVID. And I think it's important to lay out a few things related to mental health. First of all, is that just because you're successful doesn't mean that you're going to be healthy. In fact, a lot of players, that seems to be the carrot, is if I can only win, if I can only get to the next level, if I can only make a AAA team, then I'm going to be healthy. And we know that that's not the case. In fact, a lot of the time, the things that once you reach that success, then there can be a real struggle to continue with that success. So just because you find success doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be healthy. Now, the other part of that is that when we think of mental health and things like anxiety, things like performing your best, things like dealing with failure, we know that some of the relationship between how you're perceiving things, the psychology side of things, is related to your brain and your brain health. And I have the privilege of being in the neurosciences at the university, where we're doing an awful lot of studies related to how the brain works. And that's been really, really important in terms of forging research that has been very helpful for players. For example, when it comes to just being able to sharpen your focus, probably heard your coach, probably heard your parents say, you got to pay attention, you got to be more focused. Well, how do you do that? What are the things that you need to do in order to sharpen your focus? What about shaking things off? We all have lots of thoughts. Psychologists say the average person thinks between 60 and 70,000 automatic thoughts in their brain every day, and about 80% of them are negative. So how do you change that? How do you focus your thoughts to be more positive, especially if you're struggling, especially if you feel like you're being in a slump or you're in a slump? So again, the relationship here is principle number 3, which is when you're in a healthy place, that is when you're feeling in a positive mindset, you're more likely to perform well. And you know this from your own experience. If you've had a bad game, you start to feel it. You start to feel that heaviness. You hold your stick too tight, proverbially, as they say, or you struggle just with the mental game. And that's a weight. And so when you're in a position where you're healthy and you're feeling positive and you're getting sleep and all those things, you're most likely to perform at your best. And that's what you want, right? You want to be in a place where you're performing your best, where it's not like, oh man, I had an off game. It's no, I was in the best place possible to succeed. And that's why it's really good to think through some of these concepts. Like I said, I've had the privilege of working with some pretty amazing athletes. And I did not work with these two individuals, but I think their quotes are really important here. Simone Biles, the most decorated Olympic gymnast in history. She's an American girl. She's won more medals in gymnastics than anybody else. And yet, last Olympics, most people will probably remember that Simone Biles was in a position where she was struggling. For the first time in her life, she was not performing at her best. And she had an interesting quote, which she says, it's honestly petrifying to have your mind, to not have your mind and body in sync. Maybe you felt like that. There's some days where, for whatever reason, it just feels like you're not performing at your best. And it's, well, what do you do in that situation? What am I supposed to do? How do I change my mindset? Another quote, I grew up in Montreal, so the Canadians have a bit of a place in my heart. And Carey Price is one of my favorite players. And here's a quote that I think is kind of humbling. But he talks about how after years of neglecting his mental health, he now is in a situation where he has to take care of things. And that's why I think it's great that you as young athletes are here tonight. I think if Carey Price could give you some advice, he would say, you want to manage mental health. And again, if you listen to his story, it's quite compelling that he dealt with a lot of anxiety over the years, and he didn't know how to cope with that anxiety. He really struggled with that. And so he turned to substances, he turned to alcohol in order to mask that anxiety, and it really took a toll on him. So again, the point is that there's lots going on for athletes. And one of the things that I like to do in my spare time is I've done a few Ironman triathlons, and I really enjoy that. And for those of you that are not familiar with the Ironman, it's a grueling race. For some reason, I like pain and punishing myself for hours and hours on end. But you start with a 4-kilometer swim, and then you do a 180-kilometer bike ride, and then you finish off with a marathon. So it's a grueling race that takes anywhere. The pros are doing it in 9 to 10 hours, and the amateurs like me are doing it in a little longer than that. But in spite of it being a very grueling race, there's something very compelling about it. And so as I was preparing for my Ironman this past summer, I really wanted myself to say, what do I need to do? And one of the interesting areas that I explored was looking at information from the Navy SEALs. Now, the Navy SEALs, you've probably heard, but they are epic in terms of the training and the demands that their members go through. So they go through these incredible training regimes where physically they're pushed to the limit, not just physically, but mentally. But by pushing themselves mentally, there's certain things that they do that allow them to do some just absolutely astounding things. And there's lots of cool YouTube videos about this stuff. One of the things that they can do is they can stand underwater, they can swim underwater with their hands behind their back, and they can hold their breath for 7 to 8 minutes. I don't know about you, I can get to about a minute and a half, and then I'm gasping for air. These guys push themselves, and they can be underwater for 7 to 8 minutes. They also do things like blindfolding themselves, being in a very stressful situation, but they have to be able to focus their mind so they can put their guns together completely in the dark. So they do these complex motor tasks without any ability to see what they're doing, and they can do this very efficiently and very effectively. Pretty cool how the human mind works. So we've learned a lot about this mental toughness or the ability to be mentally strong from the Navy SEALs. But we've also learned something else, and that is every person has a breaking point. Now, for you as an athlete, again, you have lots of good things going on for you, but there's also a lot of stressors. And sometimes you reach a breaking point. And when you reach a breaking point, what that feels like is you're just not able to perform like you normally do. Maybe you've been so anxious, right, that you're shaking, you're trembling, or you're really nervous, and suddenly your mind is going blank. Maybe it's a test at school, and you thought you were prepared, and your mind just shuts down, right? That's part of what we call psychological breakdown, when your brain is not working well because of the stress you're under. And so, of course, this has a negative effect on your performance. And we don't want anybody to be in a position where they feel they're at their breaking point. And that's why we'd be very glad to work with athletes. Again, I've worked with athletes at all levels who sometimes hit the wall and then they need some professional help. All right, well, let's talk a little bit about that. But when it comes to athlete mental health, again, there's a lot of positive things that are going on when you play sports, right? There's teamwork. You have goals. You want to win a championship. You have your own goals. You want to score. You want to play defense. You want to not let goals in. You want to improve your physical fitness. There's a lot of positive things about playing sports, and that's, I'm sure, why a lot of you do it. We also know that there's some unique stressors that athletes have to deal with. A lot of it has to do with performance. Maybe you've been stressed out and feeling like you're not performing as well as you could, or you go to a tryout and it's like, man, I'm not able to show my stuff. There's that stress that comes from when you're not doing or playing to your level. There's also risks and the stress of playing in a very physically demanding sport, not only conditioning, but the physical side of things. So you can get injured. What do you do if you're injured? How do you keep your mind sharp when you're not playing the game? And sometimes that can be a very worrisome situation where you feel like you're missing time away from your teammates, you're missing time from your own opportunities. So that can be very stressful. There's public scrutiny. Of course, I'm sure most of you have a phone, and the phone pops up and tells you things about yourself. And some of those things are positive, and sometimes they're not very nice. And that can be stressful to deal with. So as athletes, you do have some very unique things that can affect you more than the other person. Now, the great thing is that when you participate in sport, that being physically active is one of the best things that you can do for your mental health. Even 15 minutes of regular activity. So if you go out for a walk for 15 minutes, you're going to increase the levels of dopamine in your brain. And dopamine is this really important neurochemical that's involved in goal-directed activity, that's involved in your ability to focus. So sometimes when you're tired, you don't feel like going for a walk, and yet that could be the best thing you can do in order to sharpen your focus. Again, playing on a team, working towards a goal, pushing your limits, knowing what your limits are, well, that's a good thing to know, because then you know how far you can go. And some of you are probably every day you're trying to challenge yourself to push through your limits, and that's a really good thing, because then you become aware of what you need to do in order to get better. So we know that sports and what you're doing right now is a really good thing, and it actually buffers against stress. And by that, I mean, sometimes people go through some crappy situations. Sometimes they go through some difficult times in their personal lives, whether it's within your family, whether it's at school. Some of you may have learning disabilities or attention disorders, and school is really, really hard. Well, sports is your outlet. I work with a lot of football players, and we have a high number of football players who struggle with attention, that are diagnosed with attention disorders. And they'll tell me that the best part of their day was when they got to play sports. And so it's a really good thing for you. And here's a little bit of the academic side of things, but we know from published studies that say when people are involved in sports, it's a good thing for your mental health. Maybe you've experienced that. You've had a rough day and you get to play hockey with your buddies. That's always a good thing. But keep that in mind, because being a participant in sport, pushing yourself at the highest level is actually a good thing. It comes with its stressors, but it also can be a really positive thing. So by playing sports, you're actually doing a lot of things to protect your mental health. Now, there's a lot of times when athletes start to wonder whether they're dealing with something more problematic, right? I get asked this question quite a bit as well. I'm anxious. Does that mean I'm crazy? Does that mean that there's something wrong with me? Right? I had one of the professional football players that I worked with before a game, he would puke. Every game, he would find the bathroom and he'd have to throw up. And he was, I mean, when he finally started to talk about it, he was really concerned that there was something really wrong with him. And that's where I explained to him that a lot of that just had to do with anxiety. But he was worried that there was something wrong with him. So this is how we differentiate when somebody is dealing with normal mental health concerns versus something that's what we call clinically concerning. That means where you want to seek some type of medical or psychological attention. So again, common stuff that athletes deal with: feeling mad, down, discouraged after a game. You have a poor performance. Well, of course, that's going to be, that's going to be a negative thing for you. Sometimes you lose it in a game. You uncharacteristically take penalties, or you just lose your temper and it costs you. Well, those things are fairly normal, not necessarily good for you, but they're normal. I'm not sure how many athletes are here, but when it comes to getting anxious, I would say 50% of the athletes that I talk to have some type of anxiety before a game. They get nervous. Well, how do you deal with that? That's a big thing to master because that can really affect your performance. And again, worrying about an outcome, being a worrier, well, that's not necessarily a problem, right? Most people tend to worry about things, especially when things are not going well. Where we do come concerned, and this is where we want athletes to really be educated and to be aware, and the parents that are working, the parents that are on this presentation. Again, what we're looking for is things that last at least 2 weeks. When you can't shake that really down feeling, when you are anxious for a prolonged period of time and you're worried and you get up and you feel worried and you go to bed and you're worried about things, you can't shake it. That's where maybe you would want to speak with a medical doctor or a psychologist, because that could be a sign that something is more significant is going on. We also want to see and make sure that the negative feelings that you're dealing with, if they generalize to multiple situations. That's where you're anxious, not only at school or not only at home, but when you're playing sports. When we see that your worry or your nervousness or your depressed mood is affecting you on a day-to-day basis in multiple environments, then that can be an indication that something is more serious that you would want to take steps with. We also say one of the biggest predictors that somebody is dealing with some mood issues is changes to your sleep and changes to your appetite. Sleep is one of those things. When you're depressed, when you're anxious, your sleep is not going to be the same. And that, of course, can be part of the problem, because then you're tired, then you're fatigued, and then you feel worse, and then you probably play worse, and it becomes this really, really problematic cycle. And so mood issues, being clinically depressed or being clinically anxious, we almost always see some type of mood impact. So that's where we want to make sure that athletes are aware and talking to whoever they need to talk to about dealing with things that may fall in that clinical concern. So I hope that helps, and just in terms of clarifying how we would differentiate those type of symptoms. Now, the last thing I want to address is that when it comes to mental health challenges in athletes, you can see that there's a number of clinical diagnoses. So just because you're an athlete doesn't mean that you're immune to these other psychological conditions. I think there's a bit of a myth that people think just because I'm an athlete, I shouldn't have some of these concerns. I shouldn't have depression, or I shouldn't be dealing with this. I was working with a player recently that was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Robert Leonard, he was a goaltender for the Vegas Knights and for Buffalo. He had bipolar disorder. And that was something that was really challenging for him. And when he was unmedicated, he would really go off the rails. So that was an added thing that he had to deal with. And yet he made it all the way to the professional levels. So again, these things can be a barrier, but they aren't a wall. Doesn't mean that you can't go through them. However, we want athletes to understand that not every athlete is going to feel mentally healthy at all times in their life. And so you can see here some of the diagnoses that we look for: depression, what we call an adjustment disorder. So sometimes if you have a very stressful event in your life, for example, something happens in your family and your mood is not the same, you're angry, or you're just down and discouraged in response to that event, we call that an adjustment disorder. We talk about anxiety, where some people are just really, really nervous in public situations. Grant Fuhr, a former goaltender for the Edmonton Oilers, he dealt with a lot of social anxiety. He was not comfortable being around other people, and so he had to learn how to deal with that. Attention deficit disorder, we see a fair number of hockey and football players that have an attention disorder. They have to be medicated. And sometimes that causes issues in a practice when coach is talking to you, you're easily distracted. So there's a lot of these things that can happen with athletes. And as I said earlier, it doesn't mean that you're different. It doesn't mean that you can't do it. It just means that there's some things that you may want to pay attention to. I hope that helps. I hope that describes some things, because I get asked that a lot is well, just because I'm an athlete, shouldn't I be feeling good all the time? And we're realizing more and more, especially after COVID, that athletes have more things going on that they're willing to talk about. All right. So to just summarize quickly, mental health is a state of being that's focused on how well you're feeling. You as an athlete are going to face unique circumstances that are great for you, that are going to promote positive health, that are going to, again, just being involved in physical activity is good for the brain. It's good for your mood. But it also can take a toll on you, especially when things are not getting better. So I hope that helps. I'm going to move on to the other side of things, the other mental, the mental performance side of things. And I love the quote from Wayne Gretzky, greatest player that ever played. And he himself said, hey, when it comes to hockey, most of it is what's going on up here. Most of it is how I'm perceiving. And so that's why I think a lot of you are here, is because you want to know, what do I have to do in the world of mental performance? So the framework that I like to focus on when working with athletes, if they want to build their mental game, if they want to get better in terms of their mental performance, I like the term mental fitness. If you want to be more mentally fit, there's a few areas that you want to be aware of and you want to be working on. We're going to talk about a couple of those tonight, but there are other things that you want to be aware of, and you can see them right there. Focus, that's just your ability to dial in when you need to. Most of you know, when you're really dialed into something, you're right there. You're able to perform well because you're not distracted. Well, how do you optimize your brain? How do you optimize your mental performance? I think identity is also a really big thing, is who are you? Who are you on your team? What do you mean to the rest of the players on your team? What are the characteristics that make you who you are? And how do you connect with that? Because when a person's really in tune with who they are as a player, they can really, really become great in their own respects. Resilience is another topic we're going to talk about today, which is just the whole mental performance, the mental skill side of things. And then satisfaction and well-being, that has to do with your mental health, and then transitions. Every athlete moves from playing at the younger levels to moving to the next level. And so there's lots to think about there. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about focus. Let's talk about this important cognitive area, or how do you optimize your brain and your brain functioning? And so the questions start with, what is the fuel for your brain? What helps? What are the things that we know scientifically are going to build your ability to focus longer, to be more dialed in, to be able to complete the skills and the activities that you want to at the level that you want to? Again, we know that when it comes to how the brain works, that's going to be related to your performance. And the more your brain is working well, the more you're going to perform it very well. Now, a few of the building blocks, and Dr. Naidu gave a great presentation a few weeks ago about sleep and hydration and nutrition. Those are core. If you want to start building a strong mental performance game, you're going to have to take a look at your sleep. You're going to look at your sleep habits. What are the things that you're doing to get yourself for sleep? What are the things that keep you asleep? Hydration, staying hydrated, and the right types of nutrition. Those are core, again, to your brain functioning well, the fuel that drives your brain. We're going to talk about a couple of the cognitive pieces here. So the things that really can help or hinder your brain performance. And again, everything that I tell you today comes from the scientific literature, and I can back it all up with different papers that we've seen on these different topics. Okay, so let's start with this term focus. Probably heard your coach, probably heard your parents, probably heard a lot of people, maybe your teachers, if you were And when I was a kid, sometimes I heard that quite a bit. But what does it mean to be focused? What for you, when you are really focused, what does that look like? And why is that important? What are the things that help you dial in? And what are the things that don't help? So here's my two principles. Here's the two things that you really want to focus on if you want to build your mental attention, your mental focus. The first is breathing, the other, or breathing and mindfulness. So I'm going to go through a little bit of that with you to tell you what that's like. But we know that when a person is very involved with breathtaking, they engage in breathing activities, it actually controls your mental state. We can take a person, and if this was a live session, I could have a person breathe in and out very quickly, and they could start to feel the feelings of anxiety just by breathing very quickly and shallowly. That's one of the things that happens when a person's anxious, and you may have heard of panic attacks before, right? So just by regulating your breath, by regulating your mind, engaging in activities that are what we call mindful, it helps with your ability to focus. The bad stuff, the poison for your brain, is distraction. You live in a busy world, okay? We all know that. We have lots going on. Everybody has one of these things, right, that you're using on a regular basis. But too much of that, especially distraction, can be really problematic to your game. And I think you've all been in a situation or probably can relate to a time where you just felt that there was too many things going on inside your head. So let's just dive into the breathing side of things. We know that when a person breathes, it changes their brain chemistry. Yeah, it may seem a little interesting, but just by taking slow, deep breaths, we actually can change the chemistry in our brain. As I told you, that just by breathing slowly, you actually invoke different brain centers that are involved in calming you down. And so for some of the athletes that are here, maybe you deal with anxiety. Maybe you're like my player that was throwing up before the game. Maybe you're just really worried and you get the butterflies in your stomach and you're really, really struggling with managing your worry, your anxiety, that you're feeling just a little on edge. Breathing is the core foundation to that. On the opposite side, if you're feeling lethargic, if you're feeling tired, if you're feeling fatigued, even 10 quick breaths through your nose in rapid succession can increase your levels of arousal. I know most of you are in school and you're students. And one of the studies that was very interesting that was published a couple years ago is when people would take 10 to 15 quick breaths through their nose, it would increase their level of alertness. And we saw that there was an improved performance on learning and memory tests, just simply by breathing quickly through your nose. It increases your level of arousal. Consequently, if you need to calm down, slow, deep, prolonged breaths are really, really helpful for focusing for being able to focus your thoughts. So again, mindfulness activities, and what we recommend is 3 to 5 minutes. So somewhere between half an hour and 15 minutes before your game, by engaging in a mindfulness activity, you can allow your brain, you can allow your muscles, you can allow your body to calm down. Now, some of you are on the other side of the spectrum where you need to get yourself woken up, right? But for individuals that are struggling with the anxiety, they're struggling with the worry, again, we would recommend about 3 to 5 minutes where you take these slow, deep breaths and you're not responding to anything around you. You're just focused on what's in front of you. I like to have my athletes sit in front of me, put their hands on their knees, close their eyes, and just focus on the breath coming in and the breath going out. Focusing on just the feeling of their hands on their knees, the feeling of sitting in your seat, all those things that are what we call interoceptive. That is, you're focusing on the internal side of you, not what's outside, but what's on the inside. And by doing that for 3 to 5 minutes, we can see changes in brain states where a person can go from being somewhat anxious to being much more calm just by engaging in mindfulness activities. I've certainly seen a real increase in the number of players that are asking me about mindfulness at the professional levels of sport. Because there's a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of stressors out there. What are you doing to calm your mind? So again, encouragement is, if you deal with anxiety, if you're feeling that you're stressed, what are you doing about it? Well, you should engage in at least regular mindfulness activities. In fact, I'll give you a real interesting number. That's the number 17. We've seen that when people are able to engage in mindfulness activities for 17 minutes, that's a long time when you're sitting with yourself and with your thoughts, we start to see permanent changes in the wiring of your brain. That's right. 17 minutes of being mindful can create permanent changes, and that translates into your ability to focus for long periods of time, to deal with more distraction and not be distracted. So again, powerful things from the world of neuroscience. The other thing that, again, I mentioned to you, the poison for your brain, the thing that can really derail your ability to perform well, is multitasking. And I know that we live in a very busy world and we all have to multitask and there's lots of things going on. And yet the psychology of it is that it can be really, really problematic. And I'll give you some scientific evidence of this. So what we would do is we would take these person like you see on the right, and we would stick them in a brain scanner. And then they broke the individuals into two groups. One group, they had to do one task, one problem-solving task, and get it done as quickly as they can. The other group, what they had to do is they had to multitask. So they gave them several problems to do at the same time, and they wanted to see how long and how effective they were at these problem-solving tasks. Things like Tetris, moving shapes around, all those type of things. What was interesting is that when people were multitasking, they felt like they were accomplishing more, right? So probably some of you, I would bet, you're sitting in class or maybe you're talking to your friends and you're on your phone. You feel like you can do more things by multitasking. The results tell us a different story. That when you do things one at a time, that you're more likely to get that problem-solving task done quickly and more efficiently than when you're multitasking. In spite of the fact that people who multitask would say and would indicate that they felt they accomplished more. So that's the catch. You feel like by multitasking, you can do more. The encouragement that we have for players is to put this away. So not having that with you about half an hour before a game. Focused on what you have in front of you, whether it's a test at school or whether it's a big a hockey game or a practice. Managing the amount of distraction that you have in your life is really, really important. Focusing on one thing at a time, focusing on practice, focusing on a single skill is really, really important. Again, really hard to resist the urge to multitask. There's so much stuff going on around you. And yet we know that when people are trying to multitask, they're going to feel like they're accomplishing more, and yet they're more likely to make mistakes and they take longer to do tasks. So again, this chemical that I've mentioned before, dopamine, it is such a key, right, when it comes to focus. And so when you distract yourself, right, there's too much dopamine going through your mind because your mind is just trying to focus and trying to do too many things at once. When you're more calm, there's lower levels of dopamine that allow you to focus on one thing at a time. So the encouragement there is manage your focus. What are the things that distract you? So here's what I would encourage every athlete to do. What is your pre-game routine? What is your pre-game, pre-practice? What are the things that you do? I think it would be great for every athlete to really think through what this is. And a lot of my players are starting to do this now, is they have a routine that helps them to focus. They put away the things that distract them and they focus on the things that they can. And so we do recommend about 30 minutes is a helpful thing. There's some interesting scientific papers that have come out about listening to sounds that are 40 hertz. So if you go to YouTube and you type in 40 hertz, you'll see it pop up. It's a certain beat that when you listen to it, it helps increase your levels of arousal. And even 5 minutes of listening to 40 hertz sounds can improve your focus. Interesting. What you hear affects how much you can pay attention. So again, we know that there's a lot of variability. People do things very differently, but the goal is to find a routine that helps with your focus, that helps you get dialed in. Now, I mentioned extroverts and introverts. Some people recharge their batteries or they get focused by talking to others. They're social, and some of you are probably like that. You get more energy, you feel more focused when you're talking. The other people, the introverts, charge their batteries by being away from people. And so being around and talking to people before the game is actually a distraction. And that's where you as an individual have to figure out what seems to help me, talking to other people or avoiding distraction. Again, Grant Fuhr is a player that used to, and what he would do is he would play a game of golf by himself before a game. That helped him to dial in. So again, knowing yourself is really important. The other question you want to think about when you're developing your pre-game routine is avoiding distractions. What are the traps? What are the things that negatively take your focus from what you want to be thinking about and have it on something else? Again, phones are a common thing, but that's not the only thing. What are the things that you tend to think about that are not productive? So again, making sure that those things are out of sight and out of mind, and that I would strongly encourage this whole practice of being mindful, breathing slowly in, slowly out, and doing that for 3 to 5 minutes. That can have a very significant impact on your ability to focus when you can. The other piece that I'd like to speak about today is resilience. Resilience is being able to be successful in spite of obstacles, right? Resilience is a characteristic that's very desirable for athletes because the more resilient you are, the more effective you can be. And I like this quote from John Wooden, famous basketball coach, most winning basketball coach in college history, but he talked about the role of confidence and how important that is. Okay, confidence. For those of you that want to build your confidence, or you say, man, I think that's an area that I want to grow in. What does that mean to be a more confident athlete? You can't just buy that in the store somewhere and say, okay, I've got confidence. How do you build confidence? Well, let's look at the definition. And I think it's very interesting that when you're confident, it's a progressive expansion of the things that you feel you can do. Let me say that again. When you're feeling positive about yourself, when you're feeling confident, you're more willing to take risks. You know that you're more willing to do the things that you're good at. Conversely, when you're losing confidence or you don't have much confidence, there's a narrowing of the things that you feel you can do. And that's an important thing to think about, because when you're playing with a lot of confidence, you're probably doing some things where you're taking more risks. Conversely, if you're lacking confidence, even the things that you normally do well, you're probably not doing as much. And that's important to think about, because if you want to get better and you want to improve your confidence, then you want to think about what are the things that give you the edge? What are the things that help you play at the level you have? And are you not doing the things that you used to do? And that's where practice is a really great environment to bring that in. So when you're in a slump, when you're feeling like you're struggling, what you want to be doing is you want to work on the things that you know you're good at, and you want to do those in practice, and you want to be very mindful that you're not going to restrict your behavior, but you're going to actually do more things. Keeping an edge means being confident and taking more risks. The other thing that I get asked a lot is how do I work with the negative side of things? We've all had an experience. We've had a rotten game, or we've had a terrible game, or maybe it's a terrible shift and you had a giveaway and it cost your team a goal, or you made a really bad pass, or you missed a shot that you're so used to making, and now that's weighing on you. And now it's really ticking you off, or maybe you're anxious about it. And the next time the puck is on your stick, you're now a little tense. You're now a little bit worried. How do you deal with that negative energy in the moment? All right. And so when we think of the impact of negative thoughts, it often comes with overthinking. There's too much going on in your head. Well, how do you deal with that? How do you manage that tendency to overthink? Because when you're making mistakes, you tend to overthink. When you're not making mistakes, there's more of that flow. You're in the zone. You're feeling it. All the terms that we use when you're just playing without thinking about it. And that's a state where most people are successful, is when they're in the flow. And so when we think of mental states where you're not overthinking, we often see them when people are having fun. When's the last time you had fun playing hockey? No rules, no practice. You just went out and had fun. You were probably relaxed, and probably in some cases, being involved in repetitive practice can be really helpful for decreasing your thinking. Because when you practice things, you get better at them, and then you don't have to think about them so much. Most of you, when you started to drive, you had to think about everything that was going around you. But then as you started to drive more, it became automatic. Now you don't have to think about driving as much. And that's what we're talking about when it comes to sports, is a mental state where you're not focused on thinking too much. So here's a nugget that I have for you. And I think this is a really helpful thing to think through. And that is called the reframe. When I was going through my psychology courses, one of the things we learned as counseling psychologists is that you have to reframe a negative situation into a positive one. Now, sometimes that feels like a little silly. Sometimes it feels like, yeah, right. Okay, that you're just telling yourself just to think things that aren't necessarily true. But here's the deal. When you reframe a negative emotion, you can actually turn momentum. You can actually redirect that negative energy into more positive energy. And that's what you're after. Well, how do you do that? Let's say you just were you're out on a shift and you gave a really bad pass and the other team scored. How do you shake that off, right? Most times you'll see players and they're on the bench and their heads are hanging. You can just see their body language as there's lots going on upstairs. Well, the way to deal with that is to acknowledge the negative emotions. You can't lie to yourself. You can't tell yourself, oh, I'm the best player in the world, when you just screwed up. But you can acknowledge the emotion that you're feeling, because then you feel like you're aligned with how you're dealing. You're not lying to yourself, and nobody wants to be lied to. And so by acknowledging your negative emotions, saying, yeah, I'm really mad, I'm really disappointed, I'm really upset, but then you change the narrative. Then you can say, not I'm the best player in the world, but I've got this, or something that keeps your mind in a positive direction. So you acknowledge the negative thought, and then you redirect it to something positive, right? And some of the players that I've worked with, that's what they do, is that they have to acknowledge that they just screwed up, but then they have to rethink that they have the ability, that they have this moment. They don't want to let that situation get away from them. They don't want to dwell on the negative. They don't want to hang themselves on the bench for the rest of the game. They want to be back in the game. Reframing it is a great way to do that, by being genuine, acknowledging your mood states, and then changing your mindset. Practice it. I challenge you to do that. The next time that you have something that doesn't go very well for yourself, try that. Reframe it, right? Talk to somebody, talk to your parents, talk to your teammates, and say, I need to reframe. I need to think through this. You have to practice that and make it genuine for you, but it can be a really powerful tool. The reason why it's powerful is because when we look at the neuroscience, when we look at how the brain works, what's really powerful, what I think is really, really cool, is when you reframe, you actually give your brain and your body energy. A great example is that sometimes you've seen a player who's having a really bad game. Or if you ever watch boxing or mixed martial arts, you see somebody that's just getting pounded, just absolutely pummeled. And then they land an uppercut, or then the player scores, or they make a nice pass, or they make a nice hit, or they get in a fight. They do something that tells them they're on the right path. And what's interesting is that when you change that mindset and you feel like you're on the right path, you get a sudden surge in energy. And when they've looked at studies of people that have been in these situations, their muscles are still tired. They have lots of lactic acid in their muscles, and yet they start to perform at a higher level. What changed? This thing right here. You've reframed it. You've given yourself the idea that you're now on the right path. And that can be a really, really powerful tool. So my question to you is, what are the things that help you reframe? And part of that comes from reflecting on, why do you like hockey? Why are you going to get up tomorrow? Why are you going to go to bed late tomorrow after practice or after a game? What do you like about hockey? Because there's probably something there that really motivates you. When I've been tired, when I'm training for my Ironman triathlon, there's some days that I'm tired. But I think of, man, you know what I get to do today? I get to train for an Ironman. And that thought can really help reframe the negative emotion that I'm feeling. So think about your best moments in hockey, what reminds you of hockey, what reminds you of your God-given talents. All those things can really be important things that in the moment, when you're thinking about them, can really energize you. All right. So we're coming to the end here. Just to summarize it, when we think about mental health and mental wellness, they go hand in hand. Focus, right? Improving your focus takes time and energy, but breathing and managing distraction really help your brain. Resilience, building confidence, understanding risk taking, and that pushback against the negative thoughts can really improve your mindset. So that's the end of the presentation here.